Okay, welcome everybody. By now, I think you all know me. I'm Holly Charlotte. I'm the city clerk for the city of El Cerrito, and we are gathering our chairs and vice chairs today to do a little bit less formal training, but nonetheless to give you guys some training and guidance and what it takes to be in the role of the chair, or in the absence of the chair, the role of the vice chair. So I've also invited staff liaisons so that they can be here for that, to hear what I share with you guys, to also ask questions. You guys may have different circumstances for the different advisory bodies. So this is kind of intended to be a little bit less formal. I have a handful of slides that I'm going to go over with you guys. And then I have a bit of an interactive discussion I wanted to do to kind of give you guys a chance to play around with how you would facilitate a meeting if different circumstances arose. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, let's see here. Okay. Okay, so please feel free, if you guys have questions, feel free to either use the raise hand feature or just politely interrupt me. That's perfectly fine. I'm just going to kind of run through a handful of slides to kind of get us started, but this really is intended for you guys to have an opportunity to have a conversation with us. Hopefully have your staff liaison here that might be able to help facilitate any questions you may have so that you're more comfortable in the role that you're either currently sitting in or the role that you have now committed to be in for the upcoming year. So the chat is disabled, so if you have questions, they will have to be verbal. And then I'm hoping that this will be about 30 to 45 minutes, including some time for questions. So hopefully we'll get you guys in and out of here in less than an hour. Okay, so I'm going to go over briefly the election of officers. Some of you may have not done this process yet or have not done it the way it's in our municipal code in years of late. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and as well as terms for those officers. We'll cover the basics of the role, and then we'll dive into some meeting decorum and parliamentary procedure. This is intended to kind of add on to the training that we did recently for all advisory body members. So it's really going to focus down on the things that are relevant for you as a chair or a vice chair. So first things first, just briefly, the election of the chair and vice chair is in our municipal code, which is made up of the ordinances that are passed by city council, that those two roles are elected annually in April. And this is intended to line up with our annual term expirations, which occur on March 1st. So the intention is we would do an annual recruitment process. We'd get new people on board who would start terms or continue additional terms beginning on March 1st. Then come April, the body with its new membership would adopt or have elections for a chair and a vice chair. And then that person would serve for a full year. The term for that appointment is fixed, just like your terms are for as advisory body members. So even if you're appointed in May or June because of a vacancy or because the body just hasn't been able to get that item on the agenda, that appointment would go through the following April. It wouldn't be a rolling 12 months. It's a fixed April to April term, or whenever the appointment is made until April. There is a rule in municipal code that does preclude any individual from serving more than 2 consecutive years. That does not mean that someone cannot serve more than 2 years, but what it means is they can't do more than 2 years back to back. And the intention of that is to make sure that other members of the body have an opportunity to play that role. Okay, let's see. There was a scenario that came up that I wanted to cover in case it should happen at your advisory body. So when you go through the process to elect a chair and a vice chair, you may find yourself in a circumstance where more than one member of your advisory body has been nominated to fill that role. And then how do you proceed with that, right? How do you vote in order to determine who is going to be voted on first for the election of that position? So whenever you have more than one nomination, It's similar to the way that you would handle motions under parliamentary procedure, which we'll talk a little bit more at the in the next section of this. If more than one nomination is made, the last nomination would be the one that is voted on first. And then members would need to ensure that they're only voting yes for one person, because those motions would all be for the same role, but they would essentially be substitute motions, right? A motion would be made to nominate one individual, and then a subsequent nomination, another individual being nominated. It's still to nominate someone to that position, but with a modification of who. So you would vote on the last nomination made, and there cannot be more than 3 nominations that have not been voted on at any one time. So if you were to come up to that circumstance, that would be the best way to manage those. And your staff liaison would be able to help walk you through that process. Okay, so the role.
So Holly, what was the last thing about the 3? You can't have 3 nominations, or the very last thing you said?
You can't have more than 3 motions that have not been voted on. So if there were 3 nominations, essentially those are treated as 3 votes that need to occur. So 3 motions have been made to nominate that individual, and parliamentary procedure does not allow us to have more than 3 motions that have not yet been voted on. So in that case, if a 3rd nomination was made, then the chair and the staff liaison would need to make sure that a vote was taken on that 3rd nomination. And if you got back to that 1st nomination, you still had not had consensus and election of a chair, then you would start another round of consideration for nominations and motions. Does that make sense?
Okay, thanks.
Of course. Okay, and please feel, I didn't see your hand until after, Robin, so please feel free to interrupt me if I don't call on you from your hand being raised. Okay, so role of the chair. So we touched on this very briefly in the general training, but essentially the role of the chair is to facilitate setting the agenda in conjunction with the staff liaison. So typically those 2 positions will get together several days before the meeting materials are set to be published. A lot of our meetings, because of our closures on Fridays, if a meeting is being held on like Monday or Tuesday or even Wednesday, we often will publish those materials the Thursday before, because it does have to happen 72 hours prior to that meeting taking place. So then backing up from that, 3 or 4 days prior to that, there typically is a touch base of the chair and the staff liaison to go over all of the items and determine what's going to be on the agenda, what the order of those items are, and be able to have any conversation or questions reviewed if necessary for things that may have come in terms of requests from other membership, or things that perhaps staff needs or has requested to put on those agendas. Determining the order and making sure that there's an idea of estimated time that would be needed for all of those items is also important. It doesn't necessarily have to be noted on your agenda, but having an understanding of agenda item A is likely going to be maybe 30 minutes for discussion. The second item requested may take an hour, plus all of the standard items that we have with updates and things like that. Now we're looking at maybe a 3-hour meeting. So maybe we want to keep some of those items for the next agenda. So that's some of the deliberation and discussion that those 2 positions are doing in determining how and what is going to be on that agenda before it's published. The next piece, once everything is pushed out, the staff liaison is the one who's doing all the paperwork and posting requirements and disseminating information to the membership. That's not something the chair needs to worry about. But once you get to the actual meeting, the chair is the person who is presiding over the meeting. So similar to what the mayor does at city council meetings, you're the individual who would be taking the advisory body and the public through all of the items on the agenda, making sure that all the business that needs to be conducted is conducted. You're also making sure that you're keeping the discussion relevant to what is on the agenda, and that the discussion continues to be productive and moves forward. And you're also making sure that all views are heard. So making sure all members have an opportunity to speak, and then making sure that the public's right to participate is met. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail.
So Holly, one of the things that seems to happen fairly regularly is that we get a little bit off track and we're talking about something that's not on the agenda. And so it seems like it's really important for the chair and vice chair to keep that in mind, you know, sort of where's the border between just, you know, sort of a little bit of discussion and then being just, it shouldn't be discussed because it wasn't on the agenda.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a great point. And that's part of what our interactive discussion is going to have some scenarios like that. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And we'll get into that when we have kind of a more open dialogue on this.
Okay,
so,
thanks.
Thanks. Okay, so the chair is the person who can appoint members to temporary subcommittees. So those ad hoc or standing meetings or standing committees that are formed by an advisory body. Typically, it is a purview of the chair to appoint the individuals who would serve in that capacity. Oftentimes the chair will take volunteers, and then there's confirmation by the full advisory body as a whole. But in the circumstance where maybe no volunteers come forward and the work needs to be done, the chair's looking at the workload and the work plan of what's going on and making appointments for what needs are necessary for those bodies to move forward, or those subcommittees to move forward and be able to accomplish the work of the subcommittee. Representing the advisory body before council is another thing that is only the role of the chair, or in their absence, the role of the vice chair. So this typically takes format when the advisory body presents a annual work plan or presentation of their accomplishments for the prior work year. And on occasion, outside of that process, if there is a recommendation that is forwarded to city council, often our chairs will come and they'll speak under public comment to provide some information, in addition to submitting a written letter that has disseminates that information for the recommendation that was made by the advisory body. Any kind of correspondence or meeting documents that need to be signed on behalf of the body are signed by the chair and typically by the staff liaison. The most common one that you will see for that are the meeting minutes, but there may be, again, as I just mentioned, if there's a recommendation that goes to the city council, we've been working on trying to make that process a little bit more streamlined. And so what we have been doing on the last few that have come through, we've been working with the chair to write up a letter to the city council that is providing that recommendation and the vote by the advisory body, and then signing on behalf of the advisory body. And then that's submitted and published as public comment so that it's also sent out to the members of the public. And then sometimes the advisory body chair will come to the meeting and will also speak on that recommendation. And then any communications regarding any kind of sponsored program event that is being put on behalf of the advisory body. Was there?
So sorry, I have another question. So we're supposed to sign the meeting minutes. I certainly have not been doing that.
Yes, meeting minutes are supposed to be signed. And
how do we do that?
Once they're approved by the legislative body, that's part of what the staff liaison should be working in conjunction with you, because they need to be signed by the advisory body chair as well as the staff liaison. Right now, they are required to be signed in hard copy wet signature. We're working towards making that process fully electronic, with hopefully implementing an electronic signature policy here quickly. But that is what is required at this time.
Has that been there for a long time?
Yes.
Huh. I've never heard of it before. And I've been on I've been on these groups for lots of years. I've never heard that. Okay.
One prior, my mouse is getting happy here. Prior to me coming on board in 2019, I think there was not as much centralization or resources provided from a single position or a single department. And we've really tried to centralize and make all of the requirements that are laid out by city council through resolution and ordinances and things like that, as well as other regulations and government code and things like that, trying to make sure that we're being consistent across all advisory bodies and getting into compliance with some things that maybe haven't been done consistently in the past. So this may be one of those things that you've experienced.
Holly?
Yes.
Question on the minutes that I received, there's no place for a date. As a real estate broker, our legal people always tell us to date when we sign, but that is not on the minutes. Should we date Is that not a requirement for the city? Is it different as a legal document in some way?
It is not a requirement to have a date. What is required is that you're signing to a statement that that is what the version of the minutes that was approved by the body.
But no
So you
date
can
is
certainly,
required
when
for
you
El
sign it,
Cerrito.
when you're signing it, if you want to put a date on there, you certainly can, but that's not part of what we have on our template because it's not something that is required. The signature is what is required.
So what happens when, you know, the minutes end up getting approved, but they get approved with changes based on a discussion? So then a new one has to be generated?
No. So when there is a modification made to minutes and there's action taken to approve those minutes with those modifications, the staff liaison is going and changing the content of the draft minutes that were presented and putting them in final form. And that is what the chair is signing. So
But
those
that's
changes
going to
would
happen.
be-
But is that going to happen after the meeting?
Yes, that doesn't need to, it wouldn't need to go back to the advisory body for those changes if the motion was to approve the draft minutes with those modifications. Then the liaison can, outside of that meeting, make those changes that the advisory body took action on. And then the version that they sign would have those changes incorporated as per the motion that was passed by the body.
I mean, the thing that seems that, you know, when there are modifications, it's never, it just seems like it would be good if the whole body saw the changes in real time somehow. I don't know, you know, as they're being approved, which doesn't generally happen.
Well, typically in general, there shouldn't be a lot of changes to minutes because minutes are really intended to record the actions of the legislative body. They're not intended to be a summary of all of the discussion. They're not intended to be verbatim transcripts of the meetings. And so really it's ensuring that the information recorded on those documents, what content is there is relevant to the motions that were taken and that the action and the vote and what action the body approved or didn't approve is generated on that content. So on the occasion that there's something that needs to be modified, it's not extensive changes. And if the body felt that they needed to see a final version, they certainly could ask staff and give staff that direction. But typically they're minor changes and those would be reflected in the meeting minutes that are signed and posted on the advisory body's website after the liaison has finalized the approved minutes. Okay, so moving on to the typical meeting process. So the meeting is called to order, which includes announcing what time that meeting was called to order, which is helpful for the staff liaison who is taking meeting minutes, which does include what time the meeting started, who's in attendance, what was discussed, actions that were taken, and when the meeting adjourned. So the meeting's called to order by the chair and then roll call is taken. It does vary. Legislative bodies may treat this differently and there's no right or wrong way in terms of who does it, but typically the roll call may be called by either the chair or the staff liaison. I've seen a lot of advisory bodies where the chair is doing that, and then similar to what we do at city council, roll call and calling the votes is something that I do rather than the mayor doing, because he's doing a lot of other things in terms of what's being discussed and introduced at those meetings. So the roll call is taken to establish that there is a quorum of members, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And then the chair is facilitating the discussion of the item. So essentially there's the step-by-step of presenting some information for discussion, having the chance for the members of the advisory body to have questions, to have discussion, deliberate on what was presented. There's some type of, if there's some type of action needed, there may be presentation of a motion, and then that motion itself could be further discussed. Public has to have an opportunity to provide public comment, and then if applicable, there may be action and a vote taken, which kind of closes out that meeting. Now, the order of that is somewhat flexible, which is something that came up at our general advisory body training, and I'm going to give an additional resource detailed on the next slide for that. But the order is somewhat flexible. What is not flexible And what we have to make sure occurs is that there is that opportunity for public comment prior to any motion being voted on by the body. That is the public's ability to have input and provide feedback to the legislative body who is making a decision about something prior to them taking action. So if public comment's taken after that action, then there's nothing to, there's nothing to do. Their comments are not going to be able to influence the action that may be taken. So with that facilitation of the order of agendas, so this is a resource that our staff liaisons have, and some of you may have seen. It's a excerpt from a script that I put together. It's kind of based on how we do scripts for the mayor for city council meetings, but it kind of guides the chair and the staff liaison through the process as they facilitate those meetings. So they kind of have an understanding of who plays what role. Now, who is the person who calls the roll, or maybe even the person who asks for public comment, that may differ between staff and the chair, but that's a discussion of the chair and the staff liaison for each advisory body, how you'd like to do that. I have seen ones that are laid out just like this. And then in my participation in FAB in the last handful of weeks, they have a wonderful chair who pretty much does all of this, including calling the roll call or calling the members' names for votes, which is also perfectly acceptable. And then in looking at the order of how things go, there's two scenarios there, which are perfectly acceptable. In both scenarios, the item is announced and there's some kind of presentation of information. And then one of two things can happen. Either members can ask questions about the information presented, and then there could be a motion, and that motion could then be discussed by the members, public comment can be taken, and then there can be a vote on that motion. And the other scenario is where the members have a discussion about what the information was presented, and perhaps that discussion and conversation leads to somewhat of a consensus before a motion is made. Public comments are taken, and then a member chooses to take, at that point, make a motion, and there's not much discussion needed. There's an opportunity for it if there's a member who wants to provide additional information, but that motion kind of follows the discussion. So the motion usually lends to what the discussion was, and there's typically consensus at that point. That first option that is detailed on the slide is the typical process that council takes. And then the acceptable alternative is where you would have that motion, then deliberate, have public comment, and then take a vote. I would say the alternative process is much more common if you have something that is very, maybe there's kind of a split view on the advisory body. There's, one half of the group is really leaning towards this, and the other group is leaning towards that. And so there's a lot of deliberation, a lot of different opinions that are being discussed. So it might be a little bit harder to come to consensus.
So Holly, I just have a question, and maybe it's kind of covered here, but I always thought that when you call for a motion and a second, and then you always say, is there any discussion? And then you take the vote. And so is that discussion piece, like in the first scenario, you don't you had discussion ahead of time before the motion was made. But so in that case, you don't say, is there any discussion? I just always thought that you were supposed to do that, but maybe I'm wrong.
You certainly can, and that happens often at council. So the first section is pretty close to verbatim what I provide our mayor for how he runs through any particular item. And when he asks and someone makes a motion for something, if there's a member who had an additional comment or had, another question that they wanted to ask before the vote takes, they raise their hand, they'll chime in and ask, say, I have a question, or I want to ask something before we take a vote. And that does happen sometimes, and that's perfectly fine. It just really kind of depends on how the topic of the item that's being discussed. The chair may decide based on how that conversation goes, there might not be a need to have additional deliberation. Yeah.
Okay.
So it just kind of depends, but that's what I wanted to convey is that both ways of doing it are perfectly fine as long as public comment happens before the action. That is the
Okay.
one thing that cannot alter or cannot change.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So characteristics of an effective chair, making sure that you're coming prepared and that you understand the procedures for running the meeting. So you being at this training is definitely one of those ways you can be prepared. If you weren't able to join in the general staff member handbook training that we conducted last month, it is available, recorded and available on the city's website on the membership tools page. I would definitely suggest that you review that video if you haven't. It has a lot of information. We review pretty much all of the contents of the advisory body handbook. It really is intended to be a leader. So you do need to have a stronger voice and confident body language to make sure that you show some level of authority. And when I say that, I don't mean you have to be overly assertive, but you are the person that is responsible for running the meeting. So if there is a need to get, like was mentioned, get people back on track because they're starting to talk about something off topic, or they're starting to talk about something that's not on the agenda, you should not feel uncomfortable saying we need to pull the conversation back to what's on the agenda to make sure we're in compliance with the Brown Act, or saying things to make sure that you can ensure that the business of the meeting can continue. There's an expectation that an effective chair would encourage participation from all members. A simple way of doing that is if you're having deliberation and discussion on a particular item, maybe you've heard from most of the members, but there's a couple that haven't spoke up yet. Just a simple check-in, hey, member Jane, did you have any comments to add before we move on? So making sure that everyone has ample opportunity to have their voice heard and be able to weigh in on that discussion. Again, making sure that the conversation stays on topic. We do have to make sure we don't get off topic, because if it's not on the agenda, we cannot have a conversation about that. And we'll talk about that in some of our scenarios in a couple of slides. And then you do want to stay neutral. So as the person that's responsible for running the meeting, you need to make sure that you're not leading the conversation. That does not mean that you cannot share your opinion. It does not mean that you cannot be passionate about what your opinion is. But what it means is that you, as the chair, should not be starting that dialogue. You should not be leading that conversation. You should be facilitating the conversation. And then towards the end of that conversation, then you are providing your feedback in terms of your stance on whatever the issue is that's being discussed. Making sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak. So especially if you have an item maybe that is going on for a long time, there's maybe one or two members who are really monopolizing the conversation, but you're not hearing from others. Taking a minute to have everybody kind of pause and say, we want to make sure we hear from everybody. So why don't we go around? We'll give everybody 3 minutes to start so everyone can share their comments, and then we'll circle back if there's still additional people who want to share information. So just making sure that everybody has equal opportunity to participate in that conversation. Managing conflict in a productive manner. So making sure, again, that the business of the meeting can continue moving forward. And we'll talk about that in our scenarios in a couple slides as well. Respecting time allocations and limits. So especially when you're talking about public comment, you're applying a time limit to speakers, making sure that you're applying those time limits equally to all speakers, not just to some, and certainly not to no one. You wouldn't want to let everyone speak without limits, because again, that hinders the ability for the advisory body to continue moving forward the business on the agenda. And then protecting public participation. So you've heard me say it a lot. I heard it a lot when we did the last training. It is a requirement of the Brown Act, and it is very important that as staff and chairs who are running these meetings, that we protect public participation and make sure that that public comment is heard on all items on the agenda. And if it's a regular meeting, making sure that everybody has an opportunity to speak on anything not on the agenda, but which is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the body. So when we talk about the rights of the public, this is actually a little bit broader than just the Brown Act. So there is a First Amendment right to speak. I'm sure everyone is well aware of that. The California Constitution and the Brown Act, all of those guarantees the rights of the public to speak. They don't have to be an El Cerrito resident. They don't have any requirement to disclose who they are. So we cannot require someone, for example, to provide their name and address and contact information in order to speak before a legislative body. We do need some way to identify someone in order to call them, but they can give us a John Doe or Jane Smith or, you know, anonymous speaker number one, anything that we can call where that individual would know that we were calling on them. That's all that's required. The public also has a right to photograph and record meetings. So you cannot preclude someone from taking pictures of things that are happening at those public meetings. If they want to record, if they have a recording device, they can record parts or all of the meeting if they choose. And then we have a right, they have a right to reasonable accommodation. So things like assisted listening devices. If someone is hard of hearing, we have devices in council chambers where they can get amplified sound, providing closed captions for our videos, an ability to watch those videos live streamed online, providing wheelchair accessible locations for people to meet when we're in person. Those are all rights of the public that we need to make sure that we're providing. And there is information on the template agenda with a contact information, which is the staff liaison. If there's any accommodations needed, that the member of the community can contact us in advance to make sure that we can meet their needs. For public comments specifically under the Brown Act, again, we've touched on this, but I want to just touch on it again. We have a set time limit per speaker of 3 minutes. That's a reasonable amount of time for an individual to be able to convey their thoughts and also allow the business of the meeting to move forward. If that individual has an interpreter, perhaps they don't speak English and they need someone to listen to their comments in another language and then convey those comments to the advisory body, you by law have to give them twice the allotment. So if it's 3 minutes for everyone else, they would get 6 minutes. The chair does have the discretion to limit the amount of time per person. If there's a high volume of speakers, if there's a lot of items on the agenda, maybe that are controversial, and in order to be able to move forward, you can limit that as long as everyone is limited in the same manner. Again, if you limit down to 1 minute per person, everybody who has signed up to speak has to be given 1 minute. You can also limit the total time for public comment. So if, again, you have several speakers, you can limit it to 1 minute or 2 minutes, or even keep it at 3 minutes, but say we're going to allot 30 minutes for public comments, and then as many speakers as you can get through in that 30 minutes, because not everyone will take the full time, then that's how many people have the ability to speak. We cannot prohibit criticism of the agency or the body as a whole. However, we do not have to, an individual person that sits on the legislative body or an individual who works for the agency cannot be criticized and be spoken very disrespectfully about. That is something that the chair or the staff liaison can prohibit. But if there is criticism about the agency as a whole or the advisory body as a whole, that is part of protected free speech, and we cannot limit those type of comments. And then the other limitation for public comment is something that we keep reiterating to our advisory bodies, and we want to make sure it's very clear. And the chair is one of the ways in which we can prevent this from happening. So it's really important to understand that the ability of the public to provide comments under the Brown Act is not the ability for the public to have a dialogue back and forth and a discussion with the members of the advisory body. It really is intended to be public comments provided one way, given to the advisory body so that the advisory body can hear those views and opinions and perspectives of members of the public, and then they can take that information and they can use that in their determination of how they may want to act or take action accordingly. If there is a need or a desire by the body to respond very briefly, that's certainly allowable, but it should not be a back and forth conversation, because that's then prohibiting the ability of the advisory body to move forward. And when you talk about this, we're talking about typical routine Brown Act body meetings. We're not talking about if the body is holding like a town hall or a public forum where there is an intention to have that public dialogue and discussion. That's a different circumstance than simply giving the ability to provide comment on items that you have on your agenda. Okay, let's see. Okay, so this is the part that I'm hoping will be a little bit interactive. I have some notes on all of these, but what I'd like to do is give you guys the opportunity to kind of share how you think you would handle these type of scenarios, because the ideas you have may tell others on the call if that's an idea that maybe they would do it that way, maybe they do it differently. And these are things that may come up at your advisory body meetings. And so hopefully the intent is that this will kind of prepare you in terms of the line or the way of thinking to make sure you're on the right track in terms of how you would approach this. There is sometimes going to be more appropriate for the chair to respond in these situations. Maybe it's more appropriate for the staff to respond in these situations. But either way, there should be response by the people that are leading the meetings. And since you're in that role, I want you guys to feel a little bit more comfortable with that. So I'm just going to run through some scenarios, and I just want you guys to share kind of, anybody who wants to share how they might respond to this particular scenario. And then if we don't cover some of the notes that I have or things that I had thought of, then I can share those with you guys as well. So the first one is the members. So we're talking about advisory body members. Discussion is moving beyond the role or the work plan of the advisory body. So these are those responsibilities that are outlined either in resolution or ordinance by the city council. What do you do when the discussion is starting to get outside of that purview? Does anybody want to share thoughts on what they would do or how they would get that conversation back in line with what the advisory body's responsibility is?
Well, I'll just say that it happens, and it probably happens once every meeting. And usually what I will do is just point out that we're getting off topic, and also point out that if we want to discuss it, we can put it on as a future agenda item.
Great. Yes, that's good. What if it's on something that's not under the purview of the advisory body? Like what if you are on the Parks and Recreation Commission and the discussion is going towards wanting to make some kind of fiscal recommendation on the comprehensive financial policy, for example? Any thoughts on what you guys would do in that scenario? Oh, you guys are a quiet group. I thought you'd like not to hear me talking for 45 minutes straight.
So I'll take a shot at it. This is Alan Pavlovsky. I would say, just to interrupt and say point of order, this does not fall under the jurisdiction of this governing body, and you'd have to address it with a body that handles this topic.
Okay, good. I think that's a good approach as well. And there may, like Chair Patterson, he's on our financial advisory board, pointed out, if it is something that's even getting off topic of what's being discussed, right, there can be that discussion whether or not that should be something that the advisory body wants to have on their role and responsibility. That could be a future agenda item, and that conversation can occur, but it can't occur when it's not currently part of what that advisory body is responsible for. Right? Because that would take council action to modify the roles and responsibilities and the work that they have assigned that advisory body to do. Great. Okay. So what if the members' discussion on an agenda item begins to be off topic? So now you started talking about revisions to the comprehensive financial policy, and now all of a sudden you're talking about the investment policy, which is a completely different document, different policy altogether. How would you address that? And I'm sorry, I'm using FAB examples because that's one of the advisory bodies I've been helping staff. So those are the examples that are popping in my head.
Well, this is Dick, so Patterson. So that's my role right now, and this does happen, and there's two ways to deal with it. If you're really off topic, then we say that we're off topic, and we either need to set it as a future agenda item, or, and what I mean by there's an alternative, which is think ahead when you plan your agenda, and think in terms of how a specific topic may or should be made broader to begin with as an agenda item, so that if you anticipate getting off onto something that's closely related, you can incorporate it into the discussion. So Holly's example of the comprehensive financial policy, yeah, it's a different policy than the investment policy, but when talking about one might want to talk about the other. And so maybe structure an agenda item with that in mind.
And that's a great point. So when we are crafting our agendas with our staff liaisons, it's important to understand that the description on the agenda needs to be detailed enough so Joe Public reading that agenda will have a good enough understanding about what is going to be discussed to decide whether or not they want to hear that conversation. But it doesn't have to be so narrow that you fall into a circumstance where you can't have a conversation of something that's very closely related, but not specifically what's on the agenda. But it also can't be so, you can't be so broad that it encompasses, for example, anything within the jurisdiction of the advisory body, because that's not detailed enough for the public to understand what may or may not be discussed. Any other thoughts on how you would bring that topic when, or address when you're getting off topic by the discussion? So I would just, oh, go ahead.
Hi, Holly. I think in all your examples, and this is what I've seen and this is what I would do, being new to this position, is have a gentle reminder of the boundaries of what you're doing there, right? And having the idea of what your role is or what the advisory body role is key to that. So when the discussion is off topic, it's a way to rein in the discussion, and two things can happen. As Dick mentioned before, is one is that you could put it on a future agenda if it can be pertinent, or number two, just state that it should be taken up by the advisory body that is in charge of that particular topic. And I would leave it at that and not get too long-winded about it.
Yeah, no, I think those are both great examples. And the last thing I would say is just reminding people, we need to get back on track, back onto the topic of the agenda item. We want to make sure we're not in violation of the Brown Act, things like that. And having that ability to put a request, if someone is if the discussion is enough on some other topic, then that may require a future agenda item. And that's always a good way to kind of cut the conversation off when people know that they can continue that conversation at a future date. Great. Okay. So what if, let's see, so this is kind of loosely related, but what if the members discuss a topic not listed on the agenda, or even potentially have a discussion and take action for something that's not on the agenda? How would you handle that?
That happens sometimes at our meetings, and I would say that that's not on the agenda at this time, but if you want it to be on an agenda for the next meeting, we could discuss it then.
And if that conversation persists, making sure, right, that you reiterate, we cannot have this conversation because this is not on the agenda and it's a violation of the Brown Act. Now, in the rare circumstance that your body took action on something that was not on the agenda, if that were to happen, that would not be a valid action. So essentially, it's like it never happened, and whatever action was taken cannot be implemented. So in the case of, bigger scale things, like these are not things that advisory bodies do, but subject to the Brown Act, if a legislative body were to adopt a resolution for something that was not on the agenda, whatever that resolution approved, whether it be, execution of a contract or something along those lines, that action is null and void. It cannot be done because it was not a valid vote, and that would have to go back to the advisory body. It would have to go back through the proper process of being on the agenda, being voted on in order to be able to move forward. What if there's a challenging or disruptive member of the public? How would you politely ensure that that disruption did not continue and that the meeting could move forward? Any thoughts on that one? You guys must really like hearing me talk. So I would say the things that I would note is that, again, we do have to protect the freedom of speech. So if someone is challenging or speaking ill of the agency's action or the advisory body as a whole, as long as there's not a personal attack to an individual, then we would have to allow them to go on. However, the limit of that time to speak is one of those ways in which you can ensure that there's not too much of a disruption, right? A speaker can only speak one time on every item. People cannot sign up to speak, give their 3 minutes, and then sign up to speak and do another 3 minutes. Speaker time limits are limited per person per item. So we have no obligation to allow them to speak more than one time on the same item. When you're talking about in person, requests to the speaker to refrain from speaking out of turn. So sometimes you might have someone in the audience who is chiming in when it's not appropriate. They're talking over other people. They're not allowing the business of the meeting to be conducted. Those type of things, a polite, please refrain from speaking when it's not time for public comment. Please be respectful of the process in which we are taking to conduct business. If there's applause for, comments when people are in support of something, maybe it's controversial and there's some conversation going on and people are clapping in support and things like that. You can ask them, suggest waving of hands if they're in support of or opposition of something, and to refrain from applause so that it does not disrupt the meeting. Ellen, did you have something to share in this one?
I did have a question about that and whether this is appropriate, because we often see that people utilize their time to speak from the public to announce things not related to the subject at hand.
Yes.
How would you handle that?
That's a great question. So this is something that really, I would say it's kind of up to the chair to make a call on this. Because if there is someone who, we have some individuals who like to attend all of our meetings and they like to speak on a lot of things. And sometimes the comments that they provide are not really relevant to the item that is being discussed. But if they're being respectful, they're keeping their comments limited into that time limit, you can choose to let them say their piece and be heard and then continue on. You may also choose, if they're talking about something that has nothing to do with the item, not even within the jurisdiction. In prior positions, I've had people come and talk about, issues they were having in a city that wasn't even the city that they were speaking to. So in those circumstances, the chair may choose to say, please keep your comments to this item. If you don't have any comments on this item, we'll go to the next speaker. It really is something that you would want to kind of feel out depending on how the meeting was going and how the individual was acting. But that is a great question.
Okay, thank you.
And then the last thing I would just note, if you're talking about an in-person meeting, if there's any kind of threatening behavior or an individual who is making the members of the body or even other members of the public feel uncomfortable or worried that something, there may be some act of violence or something with the person because they're behaving in a manner that is threatening, then staff can also always has the ability to contact our watch commander if there is support needed. I don't, we don't see stuff like this happen here, but you never know. You always want to stay alert. We do a lot of training in government for, identifying threats and things like that. And people, and it's very unfortunate, but people bring guns to council meetings. There's been a lot of things that happen. And so if there's anything that may need to be addressed, then that's the time when you would want to involve the staff, and the staff liaison would help make a determination about how that may need to be escalated. Okay, so a couple more here. So what if there's a challenging or disruptive member of the body? So now we're not talking about the public, but there's someone on the advisory body that's making it a challenge for you to be able to move forward. How would you handle that? Any thoughts from anyone? it's hard because I can't see everyone's faces either with.
Sorry,
screen
so
sharing.
I mean, you could say that you would like to hear from other members of the body.
Okay, making sure everyone has equal opportunity to speak. That's a great way to kind of draw the conversation, continue the conversation, right? Not necessarily not letting them be heard, but especially if you're talking about someone who's monopolizing the conversation, maybe they're very passionate about their opinion, and it's being disruptive to the other's ability to provide comment and feedback. One of the things that we touched on in the general training when we talked about parliamentary procedure is it's common courtesy under parliamentary procedure that when a member of a body wants to speak, that they request permission from the chair in order to speak. And that gives the chair the ability to kind of call on people to talk so that members are not talking over each other. And so that's one of the things that you could gently remind individuals if people are speaking out of turn, you know, ask the members to say, if you want to speak, please request, you know, for the chair to acknowledge you to speak so we can make sure we're not talking over each other. You can also request comments be held until all members have had an opportunity to speak, right? Like you could give everybody 3 minutes and then come back around and give everyone an additional opportunity, but making sure that especially if others are not able to participate because the conversation is being monopolized by individuals, simply just bringing it back, give everybody equal times to speak and move forward. That's a great way to address it. What if the chair feels, we talked a little bit about this, but what if the chair feels really strongly about a particular item that's being considered? When and how do you think it's appropriate for the chair to express their perspective?
This is Dick. I've always thought that that I should always go last as a chair. I mean, I think it's different if you're a member, and I always prefer to hear the members' views before I speak up.
And that's part of that role of the leader, right? You don't want to lead the conversation by starting with your opinions, especially if you feel very strongly about them, and making sure that everyone has equal opportunity to speak. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, that absolutely does not mean that you cannot express your opinion and that you cannot even make a motion on an item if you feel strongly enough on it, but that it should typically come towards the end of the conversation so that you're not leading the discussion. Because again, you're in this role with a certain level of authority. So you don't ever want someone to take that authority and think, because you expressed your opinions in the conversation first and you felt really strongly, that they had any kind of obligation to go with that opinion because you are in that leadership role. So great way to provide your comments or your feedback towards the end. And then last one, what are some ways to move forward if the body is stuck on deliberations? And this is when you're talking about something that's really controversial. There's a lot of back and forth. I think, you know, and you guys certainly can chime in, but I think this is a little bit kind of like some of the other ones that we've already talked through, that giving, you know, one last round of time, closing comments maybe for each member. There's also the option to have the chair has the discretion to, if the conversation is stuck and there's not consensus, to call a vote. So say you have a motion that was made, and there's a lot of deliberation, and there's really, you can tell there's not really consensus, and the conversation is just going on, and there doesn't seem to be any resolution. The chair can ask for the vote on the item, you know, give one more round of comments, closing comments from each member, and then call for the vote. And if it doesn't pass, it doesn't pass if there's not consensus, right? But at least it kind of brings that conversation to a close. There is in parliamentary procedure an option for any member of the advisory body to make a motion to call the vote, but this is a little different than the chair. So the chair has the discretion to do that. If another member of the body wants to push an item to get voted on, they would actually have to make a motion to call the vote on the item, which would require 2/3 of the membership to agree to. And then you would go forward and vote on the item. So the chair has the discretion to do it, whereas another member of the body would actually have to make a motion and have enough support in order to force that vote when an item is still being debated. And then there's always the opportunity, if there's substantial discussion, maybe there's circumstances that may change the conversation. If you table that item and have it on a future agenda to continue the discussion. I've seen this when there's, in that conversation, there's been some requests for additional information that they feel might help provide more context in terms of the discussion or action that's being asked for. If you have any members that are not present at that meeting, that may change the conversation. So having that, discussion continue when all of the members are present and able to participate. Those are some of the ways that you would be able to try and move the body forward in taking action, or at least taking a vote on the action to determine that no action is going to be taken, if you will. Okay, so I'm trying to keep to my time. So this last section is pretty quick, but I wanted you guys to have some, a little bit of a resource in these. And I did share these slides before the meeting. So if you didn't see it, it's attached to the meeting appointment. I did the 3 slide note pages for you guys. But the parliamentary procedure, there's really 3 things that you need to be comfortable understanding. One is determining if there's a quorum for your advisory body, which is required in order to hold the meeting. So I have a little cheat sheet here. So quorum is a majority of members who are currently appointed to the advisory body. So if you have a 15-member committee, but you only currently have 8 members appointed, your quorum is a majority of 8, right? Ooh, and I actually have a typo there. I'm going to have to send that out. So a majority of 8 would be 5, not 4. So odd I picked the one sample that has a error in it, but you need to make sure you have a majority of members of those currently appointed in order to hold the meeting. If you have a meeting and you don't have enough members to meet quorum, the start time of the meeting has passed, you do have an obligation to wait a reasonable amount of time after the start of the noticed meeting to give members an opportunity to get there. So in that time frame, staff liaisons or chairs may be calling members to see if they're able to attend. Some may be running late, things like that. So usually no more than 15 or 30 minutes is a reasonable time to wait before determining that there is no quorum and that meeting cannot take place. And then essentially it's canceled before it even starts. And then, excuse me, the one notation I have there at the bottom is that there are a few of our boards and commissions that have a requirement for no less than 3 members in order to meet. So committees could have less than 3 members and hold a meeting and have a quorum, but those 3 advisory bodies have to have at least 3 members in order to hold a meeting, regardless of how many people are appointed at the time. Motions, we talked a lot about motions in the other training, so I'm not going to go over this in detail, but this is a document that is provided in the membership tools page for you guys. It's something that I put together when we changed over from the old parliamentary procedure to the Rosenberg's Rule of Order, which is the parliamentary procedure we follow now. And it kind of encompasses all of the types of motions and how you would treat those. So there's that reminder that no more than 3 motions can be open and not voted on. That's what it means to be on the floor at any given time. And when there are 2 or 3 motions to consider at the same time, the vote first happens on the most recent motion made. And then if that one fails, you would go to the next motion and vote on that. If that fails, then you would go back to the first motion made. If you vote on the 3rd motion and it passes, then that automatically kills the first 2 motions that had not yet been voted on. So there's some columns there about whether or not, based on parliamentary procedure and the way in which you interact with one another at meetings, whether it's appropriate to interrupt a speaker or not, whether a second is needed, which we talked about this briefly at the last meeting. Technically, seconds are not required for most things, but we get that we do have a first and a second just as a standard because it shows at least there's buy-in for that item to be voted on. Debatable means that if a motion is made and it's there, can you have conversation or can you not have conversation? So some of the, example of that is if someone makes a motion to recess, well, there's a need to stop the meeting for a short period of time. It's not debatable. You vote yes or no. And if it passes, you recess. If it doesn't pass, you don't, and you move on. Is it amendable? So can the motion be amended to be modified? This is often called a friendly amendment. A lot of those motions can be, but some cannot, like, a complaint about the room temperature. Well, that's not really something that you would amend. If you had a complaint about something else, it would just be another motion to complain. And then the votes needed. So majority votes is typically what's needed, but there is some that require 2/3 and even sometimes 4/5 vote to pass. And this last slide is a cheat sheet for that. So when you're talking about the number of votes that are required in order for a motion to pass, it is about the members who are present and voting. So say in the scenario, you have a 15-member advisory body and you have 10 members who are present at the meeting, your majority of votes is going to be based on those members who are currently present. So it would be a majority of 10. The 2/3 vote, 4/5 vote are things that will not come up as often for you guys. Those are more seen for some regulations out that require a majority vote. A tie vote is a failed vote. So if you have equal numbers, then the vote does not pass. And I am so sorry, I'm seeing there's a typo here too. I think it's on, both of them are on 8. So this one, for example, the majority should be 5. So I will send out a revised presentation for this that has those numbers corrected for you guys. So tie votes would fail. And then the present and voting rule, if you think about it, if the individual is in the room, it does not matter if they vote yes, they vote no, or they abstain from the vote. If they are present and voting, that means that if someone abstains from a vote, it essentially is saying, I'm choosing not to vote, but your vote counts because you're in the room and voting. So your vote for an abstention is essentially a no vote. So that's something that sometimes there's rules in some organizations. Sometimes people put things in their chart, their enabling documents that's treated differently. But here, all of our advisory bodies, our city council, everyone, it operates under that present and voting rule that's part of Rosenberg's parliamentary procedure.
Hey, Holly, can I just clarify, because Park and Rec only has 4 members right now. A
Yes.
majority for 4 would be 3, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So this, I did this with a formula, and I need to go back and look at it closer because a couple of these are incorrect. So I will provide an update on this, but you're correct. A majority of 4 would be, essentially it's half plus 1, right? So it would be 3, not 2 on that, in that case.
Thanks.
And then the few caveats, and again, these are things that are adopted either by resolution or by ordinance for these specific bodies. So planning commission requires at least 3 yes votes in order to pass. So regardless of what is a quorum or who is in attendance, even if you can have a meeting with 3 people, you have to have all 3 votes in the affirmative in order for it to pass. So that would be a unanimous, not a majority, but it is required in order to take action for that body specifically. And then for committees, they also have a little bit of a different rule. So there is a requirement of a simple majority of not less than 3 members. So for committees, if there's only, say there's 3 members currently appointed and 2 members show up for the meeting, you have a quorum with those 2 members and you can hold a meeting, but that meeting cannot have any action because you have to have a simple majority of not less than 3 members in order to take action. So taking action versus the ability to meet is not always the same number, in particular because of that rule for our committees.
So this is Robin. I have a question about the abstentions equals a no vote. I've never really heard that before, and I think it might be important for the committee members to understand that.
Yes, and that's part of why I have it in there, because it is something that's often misunderstood. So present and voting, and this is a rule in Rosenberg's Rules of Order. It's parliamentary procedure that if you have someone who is in the room, however they vote, they are voting as their vote is considered, they are there and they are considered present and voting. So an abstention essentially is saying that I am choosing not to vote on this. For whatever the reason may be, they're making a statement, they are choosing not to vote on an item. Most frequently, what I see this on, especially for advisory bodies, is if someone was not in attendance at a meeting and there's adoption of the meeting minutes, that person doesn't want to vote on it because they weren't at the meeting. They don't know how, valid the information is on the minutes, so they may abstain from voting. But in doing that, that does count as a no vote because they are there. They've chosen not to vote, which means they have not chosen to vote yes, which means by default, the abstention counts as a no vote. The exception to that is if someone is abstaining for a conflict of interest, that is different. They're not voting because they have a financial conflict of interest and cannot vote on it. Then it's treated like, if you're in person, think of that person saying, I have a conflict of interest, so I have to exclude myself from this vote. So I'm going to leave the room. And now that person's not present and voting. So their vote does not count as a no. They cannot, their vote cannot influence the outcome of the vote because they have a conflict of interest. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just thinking that it might be worth, I'm thinking of the Urban Forest Committee. The next time we meet, I'm going to tell people that an abstention is a no vote because I don't think they would understand. They wouldn't know that ahead of time. So
and that
it's
would
just
be
something that maybe everybody needs to make sure their members understand.
And that's a great point. And if you guys choose to go back to your advisory bodies, this is a perfect example of something very small in nature that can be provided as like your comments as a commissioner, right? There's staff liaison and commission member reports is typically one of our items that you have on the first part of the agenda, where if someone has a small update to give, it's not agendized, it's not asking for action, but it's giving some kind of relevant information. You may want to go back to your meeting and say, I attended this meeting and this is something that I got from that I think is worth clarifying to make sure everybody understands it. And if that turns into, if it becomes apparent that there needs to be a more detailed conversation about that, then at that point you say, we can put this on, a future agenda as an item for discussion and we can talk about it in more detail.
Yep. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm 6 minutes over my promise trying to get you guys in and out of here in an hour. So I just want to give a chance to see if there is any questions in general about anything I talked about or just anything else that you want to ask about your role as the chair. Stephen, I see a hand from you.
Well, I just wanted to say that I think that the challenge of getting the minutes verified during the remote meetings has been, how do we get a piece of paper to a chair to get them to sign it? And that's, there's a bit of effort that's required to do that. So I think that's been an obstacle.
So a couple of suggestions. So we are open to the public 9 to 1. And while we have an obligation to post our approved minutes on our website within 10 days of them being approved, it does not have to be the signed version. The signed version is for our official records. So what we do, Lena is helping support ACC right now. And one of the things that she does is she'll wait until she has a couple of sets of minutes and then she emails it. The person can print it, sign it, and then they'll either drop them off at City Hall or put them in the mail back to her. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do it, but the timing of that does not have to be instantaneous. What is important is that we're getting the approved minutes on the website, whether they're signed or not.
And so it's not possible to get the document as an email, print it, sign it, and then email it back. It has to actually be the real wet signature has to be delivered.
At this point, we are supposed to have the original signed copy in our records. As I mentioned, that is one of the things that I am working on internally, it's not something that's been done yet, but trying to put an electronic signature policy in place that will give us the ability to do to have a broader list of things that we can sign electronically. So that type of scenario that you just described would potentially be an acceptable way to receive it. So would a DocuSign signature or an Adobe signature. But right now, the requirement is that we're supposed to have those wet signed original minutes in our final records.
And so who's signing it again? So the chair is signing it
chair
and the staff liaison
And a staff
also?
liaison, yes.
So so in order for everything to be wet signature, whatever gets emailed to the chair can't have the staff liaison signature on it.
They can be countersigned just like contracts. So if you have one of the final, the final page that has the signature block, if one has the liaison signature and what's, original signature, and the other one has the chair's signature, that's perfectly sufficient. It doesn't have to be on the same one. Any other questions? All right,
But they
well,
both have to be wet signatures.
yes. All right, so as I always try to share, if you guys have any questions, please definitely reach out to your staff liaisons first, because like I said, there's always some intricacies with the different advisory bodies and how they're ran. So that would be your best place to start. And then they or you can reach out to me if you guys have bigger questions or questions that you guys can't answer. We're here to be resources for you guys. I appreciate all of your time being here. I appreciate your guys' investment in serving on an advisory body and taking on the role of the chair, because it does increase the level of volunteer work that you guys are doing for our committees. And I hope that it's conveyed by city staff that you're interacting with, that we really do appreciate you guys taking the time to volunteer for these committees and doing this work on behalf of council. So with that, I will let everyone go. I will share, as I said, I will share an updated version of those slides, and then this training and that information will be posted on our website under membership tools and can be reviewed again at a later time. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.